The Great Train Robbery made one man a folk hero. It should have made Britain ashamed. August 8, 1963. A Royal Mail train stopped on a rural stretch of track near Buckinghamshire. 15 men boarded it in the dark. By dawn, they'd taken £3 million, equivalent to roughly 60 million today. The official story is simple. A brilliant criminal mastermind outsmarted Scotland Yard, and the law eventually caught him. The real story is far messier. It's about a system so corrupt that a heist became the nation's way of asking questions it should have asked decades earlier. Everyone knows who Bruce Reynolds was, the planner, the kingpin, the man who vanished and became a legend. What they don't know is how little of the actual crime fell into his hands. Reynolds never touched the money. He wasn't on the train. He was arrested 16 months later, tried, and sentenced to 30 years. But by then, the narrative had already calcified. He was the mastermind. Case closed. The problem starts earlier. In the 1950s, British postal security was theatrical rather than actual. Mail trains carried cash in wooden crates. Guards carried revolvers they rarely knew how to use. Train drivers worked predictable routes on predictable schedules. The system wasn't designed to resist organized theft. It was designed to look respectable. By 1963, certain men in London knew this. They weren't all criminals yet. Some were mechanics. Some were electricians. One was a former soldier. They shared a different kind of intelligence. They could see what the post office couldn't. They could see weakness. Reynolds assembled them through channels that police barely understood. Boxing gyms, prison networks, shared grudges against a system that had never quite worked for any of them. He didn't recruit criminals. He identified men with motive, means, and the ability to keep quiet. The distinction matters. The plan itself was straightforward. The Glasgow to London mail train stopped at Sears Crossing at 3:13 in the morning. They'd tampered with the signals beforehand. A railway employee, a man named Roger Corddry, had worked in signals maintenance. He knew what to adjust. The train stopped. The robbery took 12 minutes. No one died. No one was meant to. The driver, Jack Mills, was struck on the head, not fatally, though the press would later call him a hero and suggest otherwise. The brutality was overstated in newspapers because newspapers wanted to justify what came next, the largest manhunt in British history. They needed the public afraid. But here's where the official story crumbles. The police caught no one from the robbery itself, not for months. They caught them from the safe houses. They caught them from the money. They caught them because the men couldn't stay silent, couldn't stay still, couldn't resist the logic that millions of pounds demanded. Spend it, move it, hide it. Visibility was their undoing, not detective work. Reynolds escaped to Mexico with his share. He lived quietly under an assumed name. He could have stayed there forever. Instead, he returned to England in 1966. Why? The official answer is hubris. The real answer is loneliness. He missed his family. He missed his country. He wanted to be known. He was arrested, sentenced to 30 years, served 10, released in 1978. By then, the narrative had already been written. He was a folk hero, a Robin Hood, a man who'd beaten the system, except he hadn't. The system had beaten him. It had beaten all of them. The real scandal wasn't the robbery. It was what the robbery revealed. British postal security was so inadequate that millions could vanish in minutes. The government knew this. The post office knew this. They'd known it for years. They chose to do nothing because nothing was cheaper than prevention. After the robbery, security improved overnight. Trains were redesigned. Guards were better trained. Procedures changed. What took a heist to accomplish, what should have taken a memo, suddenly seemed obvious. The system had been broken. A crime made it undeniable. This is the pattern we see across financial crime. The system isn't broken by criminals. It's broken by the people who run it. Criminals simply expose the break. They show us what was always there. Reynolds didn't create a vulnerability. He found one that had been ignored for decades. The men who planned the robbery weren't geniuses. They were observant. They understood systems because they worked within them. They saw gaps because they lived in the spaces those gaps created. The heist succeeded because negligence is cheaper than vigilance, and institutions will choose negligence until they can't anymore. Reynolds died in 2002. He spent his final decades talking about the robbery, not boasting, but explaining. He'd become a minor celebrity. Authors wanted his story. Filmmakers wanted his life. He was the criminal who'd become respectable through age and candor. The system had already moved on. The Great Train Robbery wasn't great because it was clever. It was great because it was necessary. It forced a conversation about institutional failure that bureaucrats wanted to avoid. In that sense, every man involved in it was doing something the government should have done itself, holding the system accountable. This is why the story endures, not because of the money, not because of the crime, but because it reveals something true about institutions. They don't reform themselves. They reform when they're caught. And sometimes it takes a crime to make them visible. Subscribe for more stories about how institutional failure creates the conditions for the crimes we remember.